Welcome to the F-Team podcast. I'm your host, Hayden Van Roon. The F-Team is a fortnightly podcast where we discuss the latest happenings and trends in business technology. In this episode, we're talking about Microsoft's new productivity app, changes to Windows 10 updates, new solutions for better video conferencing, and we unpick one of the internet's biggest outages in recent memory. All right, let me introduce our first guests. Let's start with an absolute EUC workhorse and our number one fan on Facebook. We're introducing, of course, the industrious Varun Kapoor. Welcome, mate.
Thank you so much, Hayden. Thank you so much for having me.
You're obviously a sucker for punishment. We can't keep you away from this podcast, mate. It's good to have you back.
Thank you so much. It's always a fun doing this podcast.
Fantastic. And making his webinar debut, he's the tallest and the most pranked man in the office. A big F-Team welcome to Brandy. Oh my God, Brandy. That's a new one. Brody Hamdorf. Welcome, mate.
Thank you. Thank you. I like to think my height is what makes me a target for all the pranks. So they go hand in hand.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall, right?
That's it.
It's good to have you on board, mate. Thanks for making time today. Let's get straight into it. These podcasts tend to blow out, so let's get straight into it. I have some good news. Not that I'm counting, but we are just shy of 100 days until Christmas. So shortly, a certain jolly man will be checking his lists for the first time. Luckily for Father Christmas, Microsoft has released a new app that will mean one list check is all that he'll need. What the heck am I talking about? I'm talking about Microsoft Lists. Microsoft List was released to general availability in August and is yet another productivity tool in the Microsoft 365 kit. Microsoft is calling it a smart information tracking app that allows you to create lists for every team in every situation. Guys, what is Microsoft Lists?
So basically, it's taken the functionality that was already existing in SharePoint lists and sort of split it out into its own tool and added extra details in that. It's sort of given it its own portal, its own way that you can access it through Teams, its own identity, so that it's not just another feature of SharePoint. It becomes its own tool that can be used for a lot more in-depth sort of list taking ideas, I guess. I've been playing around with it a little bit, and it just is very handy for more repeatable actions, I suppose, and just sort of hashing out the sort of tasks for a team that need to be performed individually, and sort of keeping it succinct and easy to read, and as well as tracking as you go along and complete it all, as well as having some fancy new UI, which looks pretty.
Nice. What was your take, Varun?
Like Brody said, it's more like an evolution for the SharePoint list online. The features that I like the most, it has inbuilt functionality for all the Power Platforms. So you can make custom Power Apps and custom flows with it. So I think it's more about the integration. And list is basically for tracking if you're doing more of process evolution or process improvement. That's how I see it being used in the industry.
Nice. Well, for me, like I've started using it with my team, and it's actually got some built-in standardized configurations for certain scenarios. Yep. So one of those is, for me being in the marketing team, our social media publishing, and so it actually comes with a default inputs that you can put into it, and we're finding it really useful because what it allows you to do is really have a really clear picture of where your processes are at. It integrates really nicely into our marketing channel in Teams. And you can really see the status. And if you need, for us, sometimes if it's a fairly important piece of communications, we go back and forth in the team a few times. We have a few iterations, and you can actually track where that's at a lot easier. So I think there's going to be a lot of use cases where you need to review many processes. They're all the different microprocesses that you're running at different stages potentially, and it really does a nice job of visualizing those. So I think a big thing that Microsoft has focused on recently is a lot of Microsoft apps in the past were not very pretty. And when I know, especially from a marketing point of view, if an app's not pretty, I'm going to be less inclined to use it, regardless of how much functionality is there. So they've done a really good job of making it pretty, making it really intuitive and easy to use. So I think, for me, I'd say if you're a non-technical person, it's a really useful app for you. Check it out. There's lots of different inbuilt customizations to go check out. Are you guys aware of any other particular use cases that are kind of similar to what I just mentioned?
Yes.
More around the, Brody, you want to go?
No,
go ahead. More around the manufacturing industry, I would say. So another fantastic thing that Microsoft did was integrated quite good with Microsoft Teams. So you could basically just attach it to your conversation channel, and then the frontline workers can simply open the Microsoft Teams app and just go through all the processes that are happening, and then see what's the progress of it, or how's the inventory tracking on it. So I think that's one of the use cases.
Cool. Brody?
Yes, I think especially sort of repeatable processes is where it sort of shines, being able to, get a well-defined process and put it in place. So it's not just a series of check marks and, tick boxes. It actually lets you sort of, as you were saying before, set the status of different steps that are there, reuse it for, defined processes, things like onboarding for new users, which, can be a pain when changes keep coming in, new applications are coming in, new fields and contact information, and it keeps sort of changing. So being able to track that in one single location, being able to track every step of the process and try to just have better visibility over what's happening at each individual step of the process. Yeah, I feel like that's where a lot of previous to-do lists and checkboxes fall short. Is it's either 100% complete or it's not. It's very binary in the choice. You don't get the ability to sort of describe individual decisions at individual steps. Whereas here you can assign it to individual people. If you've got a user onboarding and you've got in different departments, for example, maybe people don't have access to the different areas to add all their users. Maybe there's different tasks assigned to different people that all correlate to the same process. That's where it really helps, just sort of being able to repeat processes for users on different teams and sort of keep better information for each step of the way.
I think so. That's where the demarcation is for list and to-do and planner. Like as we discussed, list is more for processes or workflow, whereas to-do and planner, they are designed specifically to manage teams and how they are tracking with the tasks for that specific team.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
I feel like
I'll just jump in here. So I think for me, what I'm hearing is that, we've got, obviously there's a lot of similar, on first glance, there's a lot of similar applications from Microsoft in this space, right? There's To-Do, there's Excel, there's Planner. But what I'm hearing is that if you've got a highly repeatable task that you follow the same process end to end each time, then this is really good because you can restrict that down and say, here's the steps you have to follow to complete this task. Whereas in Excel or Planner or To-Do, those are more flexible. So, you can generate the type of task that you need to complete in each individual occasion. And that's the benefit. Is that fair to say, gents?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the other tasks, especially To-Do and Planner in that order, sort of are very easy for making a quick task and, immediately understanding the steps and putting them in and seeing where you're tracking with it. But when it comes to things where, the steps aren't as binary to complete, where you've actually got a process to do it, it takes time. It's not just a flick of a switch. You want to know where you're at in that progress. You don't just want to know whether it's done or not. You want to have a bit more information in it. So I feel like that's where it really sort of shines, is where those repeatable processes and being able to put them into a more documented way rather than just having a list of bullet points in a document or, just even worse in Excel. I think it's just gives it a more easy way to display all that information.
Nice one. And is the only place that you can use lists in Teams, or can you use it like on a web browser? How does it work?
So we can access lists from the portal.office.com as well. So we can use it in the online mode via SharePoint Online. So there are a wide variety of methods via which you can access it. Yeah.
I would recommend, though, if you can whack it into an existing team or channel, I think that works really, really nicely. I think that's kind of how it was intended. But
yeah, I think that's where it sort of picks up a lot of the use as well, as having the integration with everything else. Varun sort of touched on it before, but the ability to link it to Power Apps. So, when a specific step is completed, it can carry out a task. Say, for example, I keep going back to the user onboarding just because that's where I think it's going to be most useful. But like at the very end of it, once all the steps completed, forwarding through the details for them, forwarding through to the relevant managers or the relevant teams, and just linking it into,
awesome.
Yeah.
Very good. Yep, sounds like a pretty useful app. I think my advice to our listeners is have a play with it. If your instinct is to put something into Planner and you're finding you're creating yourself that same Planner task all the time, then maybe have a look at lists and see if you can standardize that, because that is where I think we're all finding the value in it. So very good. Thanks for that, guys. The next topic I wanted to raise was around some changes to Microsoft updates. So, and Windows 10 updates, I should say. So earlier this month, Microsoft changed the way it delivers updates to the parts of Windows 10 that receive and install files from the Windows update, right? So their aim here is to create a new bundling approach will eliminate confusion and streamline Windows 10's regular refreshes. So up until now, Microsoft has distributed each service stack update, which is called SSU, separately from their cumulative update, which is known as the CU. Right? So the new practice will combine the two, so SSU and CU, into one package for download and deployment for IT administrators. So I know we were discussing this in preparation for this podcast. So I'm keen to, and it sounded like there were two opposing views on this. So Jets, is this a big deal or not?
You can take the start, VK, if you like.
I'll let you start on this, and then I'll jump in.
I may be a little bit biased. I've never had to do a huge amount of patch management, other than the sort of devices that I'm directly on. But I don't see this being a huge impact. If you take a look at it, if you split it up into two groups, you've got the end users and you've got the sysadmins that are going to be managing these. End users, they're not really going to know. You're going to be lucky that they're going to be hitting install or update now anyway. They're not going to look for the updates. If it's one less line in there, they don't care. They just hit install updates. I don't think it's going to make a huge deal in terms of whether the package comes in 2 boxes or 1. I think it's going to be the same. For sysadmins that, more, especially ones that are more focused on patch management and larger sort of end user management, I feel like it's already part of their job description to understand the patches. It's already their job to understand what's going in each of them. So at the same time, sure, this makes life easier for them, but I just don't see it being as huge of a deal. It's still the same information, just rather than coming under 2 updates, it's coming under 1, which I don't see it as a huge deal.
Varun, what's your take?
I just have a simple take on this. It's more around the user experience rather than having a long list of updates to download. Even if it's not an enterprise environment, you are running a personal Windows 10 2004, you still have to download the updates, right? And now with this, it's going to be a single all-packed SSU with a CU update. And it will also help the IT admins for troubleshooting point of view as well, because earlier for the cumulative update, you required a specific SSU, and now it's going to be bundled all together. So let's say in the earlier days, if the CU would fail, then you would have to troubleshoot deeper. But now you know that Microsoft is going to release that in a package together, and it's probably not going to fail. So I think so. It's better for the IT sysadmins as well, and for the end users.
Very good. And so the key reason here, it sounds like it's a simplistic. Simplifies the process for IT admins, and I guess it removes a point of failure. Perhaps am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. So it sounds like if you're paying attention to this sort of stuff, then it's a big deal. But for end users, they're probably not going to notice it. Probably one less update, right? Is what the end users are going to notice.
That's right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think there's some valuable stuff in there, and I think it's key to know, especially if you're a sysadmin responsible for managing and deploying these things, or have a upstream provider that's doing it for you. It's important to know that that's a change, and I think as an end user, the less updates I have to receive over a course of a month or a couple of weeks, the better. So I think that's a positive thing overall. The next thing, we talk a lot about Teams. We love it. I think there's a lot of effort obviously being put into Teams. So we're going to have something to talk about every week. We're really big Teams users. One of the things that has there's a couple of key things I want to bring out. They're pretty small little tweaks, but I think they're quite noticeable. So the first one I wanted to bring up was I think you guys have probably found yourself in this situation a few times. You've got a thread open in Teams. It's quite maybe there's a pretty significant thing happening. Maybe there's some downtime being experienced by a customer, or there's a pretty big challenge that we need to solve right now. And so there's lots of chatter, and you're jumping into Teams, and you're giving people updates, and you're moving out of Teams and doing the updates yourself, and then jumping back in. And then you accidentally start a whole new thread because the chat window to start a new thread is more obviously placed than the new thread conversation. So there's a new conversation button that aims to solve this. So guys, just give us a quick overview of what this is and where the guys can find it and what the impact is of this new conversation.
It's clear to see that this isn't an issue that only plagued the Fast Track organization. There's been countless times where new users and old and everyone in between would go to reply to a thread and start a whole new thread and be shamed to death with a mirage of ridiculing
and gifs.
So it's such a simple change. I just love that they put it in. Like, it was clearly, it wasn't a huge deal. You'd edit the post, you'd click the dot, but it's just enough to reduce some of that spam coming in. So I think it's just a huge change. It's just a button down there which differentiates between whether you're making a new post in a team or whether you're just replying to something else.
So what they've done, right, is they've instead of having a chat window in the thread, in the bottom of the thread, and directly below that another chat thread starting box, they've removed the new conversation chat window and replaced it with a button. So you have to click the button in order to open up the new conversation window, and that I think is going to make a huge impact on the amount of times where you accidentally start a new thread instead of replying to a conversation. Just wanted to put that. I actually added this in earlier today because I just thought, hallelujah, what a simple change, but it's
such a huge quality of life change. I love it.
I think so. This should have been done when Teams was initially launched. Like, this is such a simplistic change and a UI thing to do. And I think so this should have been done when they launched it. Like, the amount of times we make human error starting a new thread where we should be replying to another thread, it's just insane.
I think this is an interesting thing I noticed with Microsoft is, especially with Teams product, there's lots of stuff going on. And sometimes there's really simple changes that just kind of get ignored for so long. And this is one of those times where they've finally gone, you know what, this is an important change we need to make and prioritize it. So I'm just really excited about it. I wanted to throw that one in. The next thing is a pretty simple one. So I believe in Teams, and correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but you've been able to, if you're in a Teams meeting, you on your PC or your mobile device, you can spotlight the person who's talking or spotlight a particular person in the chat, right? But that you haven't been able to do that in a Teams room. But I believe now it's possible. Is that on a Teams room system? Is that have I got that right, guys?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And I think it's just a nice, handy tool as, people start going back to the offices, but work from home is still staying relevant. It's just another quality of life improvement to have. It's not infrequent for there to be a single speaker in a meeting, or, if it's a CEO presentation, if it's a teacher having a class of students using Teams as well. It's just, you're not always going to need to see everyone on there. It's just a big quality of life to finally move this across to Teams rooms, I guess.
Nice one. Yeah, I think for whatever reason, it seems that Teams room systems, Teams tend to lag a little bit behind the I guess the general availability of the PC and mobile apps. But it's good to see that it's being if you're waiting on a feature, history says that it's coming. It just takes traditionally a little bit longer for it to come. So
you just got to wait for the nine users, 9 videos in Teams rooms, which is still lagging behind.
Yes, we're all fingers crossed. We've been really excited for them to bring that, and I'm not sure if there's any word on when that's coming, but I think we're safe to say it is coming. It's just a matter of time. The next thing I wanted to raise was some security things that we've been noticing in the market lately. So particularly over the last few months, there's been a few data breaches across different organisations within the New South Wales government. So back in April, actually, Service New South Wales was hit by a pretty successful email phishing scam. And the result of that, it gave hackers access to 738 gigabytes of confidential files affecting approximately 186,000 customers. So a pretty big attack, pretty successful in terms of what the hackers actually got access to. So I'm keen to hear from you guys, a bit more insight into actually what happened and how they successfully, attacked Service New South Wales. What did they do? How did they do it?
So a lot of the reports have still been pretty light on the exact details. Obviously, not giving out the exact cause of the breach is probably a smart idea to prevent future attacks. But for the most part, it's been confirmed to be a successful phishing scam, which has obviously sent through a link to the 47 users. They've gone ahead and clicked on it thinking it was a legitimate link and either entered in their credentials or sent through additional information that they probably shouldn't have. And this has collected up to a pretty substantial data loss in total. I think one of the primary concerns that I saw was that there was such a delay in informing the users who had been impacted by this. It's still going on, actually. They're still in the process of sending out registered posts to all the users that were impacted by it and making sure that everyone knows about it. So I think it's just a little bit scary that it's still taking so long just to know that your information has been breached. Especially with such sensitive information. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, but a lot of the information was scanned photographs of back and front of driver's license, which has full name, full address. Like there's a lot of information on there that I probably wouldn't want many people knowing, even at work, let alone other people.
It's primary identification information, which is pretty scary.
Yeah, exactly right, and especially with the ease of, or with the amount of social presence that everyone has, it's identity theft, especially through breaches in cybersecurity, is becoming all more real and all more common, and it's scary that such an easy or such a simple measure of our driver's license is going public, essentially.
It's pretty scary, and I think the reason why we raise these breaches on time to time on these podcasts is that it's easy to say, it won't happen to us as a business, but we need to really look at how attackers are gating access initially, and keep reminding ourselves of the most recent and most common attack vectors so we can protect against them, right? So obviously this sounds like it was possibly a fairly targeted attack, but I'm keen to hear your opinion, guys, on, and if you're an organization worried that something like this could happen to you, what are the basic steps you can put in place from a cybersecurity perspective to prevent against attacks like this?
I think so. To start with, the basic thing would be to have multi-factor authentication in place. Like the funny thing is, in 2019, Service New South Wales were actually made aware that they have a big loophole in their security measures, and still they did not take any steps. So I think so. To start with, basic security would be to implement multi-factor authentication, because that kind of adds 2 layers of security on when you are authenticating and signing into your Office 365 or whatever service it is.
I feel like that's almost going to be just a requirement for everything. nowadays it's still, I still find services every now and then, websites or other services that just don't even offer it as a feature or don't have it required. But I feel like it's 2020. It's got to become just the standard, something something you have, something you are. It's just got to put in more factors.
Is it a matter of, is there anything else? I mean, this is, we've been talking about cybersecurity for many years now, and that's the thing that we always go back to. MFA protects against a lot of scenarios. Is there anything else that you'd be recommending?
There are a lot of advanced features that Microsoft has on offerings. One of them would be data loss prevention policies, where you can actually tag the documents with confidential or what kind of sensitivity it has for your organization. So that could basically help with your data loss or stuff like that.
There's still as well more features. I know, like, you've got the advanced threat protection, which is sort of introducing the safe links and safe attachments, and the protection from impersonation and things like that. There's a lot of features in there that make it a lot more difficult for these attacks to come through, and they're not all that difficult to roll out. In most cases, it takes a couple minutes to configure the policy for an ATP rule or anti-phishing, anti-spam, and it's just a matter of monitoring it. So there's no short of features to prevent it from coming in as well. But I feel like no matter how many walls you put up, there's always going to be something that can get through. So there's also definitely a step in terms of strategy and personal responsibility when it comes down to things like this. One of them just being, a more aware, more awareness for end users on just good security practices. I know for us, it's pretty common knowledge to double check a sender before, a link comes in, but I feel like that's just going to be basics now, just as if knowing Microsoft Word and PowerPoint is a basic for 90% of jobs, if not more. I feel like basic cybersecurity practice should be in that space.
Definitely.
I think so. Brody made a quite good point here for the awareness of end users. I think so. The enterprises should now focus more on end user training as well, for what are the best cybersecurity practices, what not to click, and what to do in case of if you get an email which looks like a bit of fishy. I know attackers these days are getting a lot of better in terms of how they send the phishing emails and how they are designed. But I think so still cybersecurity training programs for end users would help a lot, in kind of avoiding these events happening in future.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I think, we did a workshop earlier this year, which feels like a lifetime ago now, but talking about all of this stuff, right? So we'll put a link in the description of this podcast that links to that. It's often with this sort of stuff, we say, okay, MFA, Office 365 ATP, but there's, it really depends on your risk profile. So we've did a lot of work earlier in the year, basically giving you a step-by-step guide around how to assess your security posture and how to figure out where to prioritize putting in those cybersecurity measures. So check out that blog. There's a lot of video, a lot of content we've produced. There's a blog post as well that summarizes it too. So we'll put a link to that. Let us know what you think. If you've got any questions, just reach out to us. But yeah, thanks for sharing, guys. I think that was a really useful thing. I think it's really worth keeping on top of all of this stuff, and reminding ourselves that these attacks aren't theoretical. They're often very targeted. We've seen attacks like of this nature that are targeted at large enterprises, but also we've seen attacks that are very targeted at small and medium-sized businesses too. So it's, regardless of what size you are, you need to be thinking about this sort of stuff.
Yeah. And on that note as well, sorry, I think a big thing as well is the sort of response time to this sort of things. A lot of the times you find it's more of a reactive response. Even in this case, ServiceNow came out and saying that, after this, there's a large acceleration for their cybersecurity plans and modernization of their older sort of business processes. But ideally, this should be happening beforehand. It's all well and good to look at a hole and patch it up afterwards, but you should be searching these out actively. You should be increasing on it actively rather than waiting for something to get through, waiting to be the last in the pack and hunted down. You should be, ensuring that you're up front and on top of all these things. And I feel like that's another direction in terms of strategy is considering cybersecurity as a basic required business process, just like anything else is. It should be considered at all times. It should always be actively worked on. It's never finished. You're always improving on it. I feel like that's a huge thing to keep moving forward.
I'm really excited to introduce our next two presenters. Let's start with our first-time presenter, and I'm assuming a long-time listener, Nikki McClintock. Welcome to your first ever F-Team podcast, Nikki.
Hello. And yes, I am a long-time listener. I've been with the podcast right from the beginning.
Oh, there you go.
It was way back.
Yeah. So many episodes, many episodes. So we'll have you here, Nikki. I'm really keen to get your insight on a few things we're going to be talking about today. And back again for the third consecutive podcast, the Aviator, Yoni Kirsch. Welcome.
Thank you, mate.
It's catching on.
Right, it is catching on. If you just keep saying it, it'll have caught on.
Yeah, that's pretty much my strategy for everything. It's good to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Given that's your first podcast, Nikki, you've been building yourself a bit of an empire at Fast Track, and I think a lot of the work you do is behind the scenes. So not all of our customers and listeners would know what you do. So I'm keen to get you to share a little bit about what you do at Fast Track.
Yeah, sure. I feel like you set pretty high expectations there of an empire. So I'll try and meet them, but not really sure if I will. So I've been with Fast Track for almost 2 years now. So I'm the team leader for service operations team. So there's 5 of us in that team at the moment.
Hence the empire.
Sorry?
Hence the empire.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, is that what you mean by people? Yeah. Small army.
Yeah.
So we look after a lot of the operational side from the services. So accounts, service delivery, colo space, data center operations, miscellaneous things. But one of the biggest things that we look after is hardware.
So that was one of the reasons why I was really keen to get you on. And I think the cool thing about hardware is that the situation we find ourselves in the world right now has really put a spotlight, obviously, on video conferencing and being able to kind of bridge that gap between, your workers at home and your workers in the office.
Oh, that's a leap. A leap. The momentum was there before. Come on.
It's been
brought to the spotlight, I think.
Yeah.
But it's always definitely been a demand for it there.
I think it was fortuitous that it was already on the up.
Yes. Well, I just wanted a really lazy segue, so mission accomplished.
Ruined his punchline.
So one of the things we've noticed in the video conferencing space of late, for the last little while, I think it's been a problem that's been around for a long time, is that, a lot of customers, have decided on a particular software provider that they want to use for their video conferencing solution, right? They go, whether it's Teams, Zoom, all of the many, many different platforms, they choose one because it's easy, right? To have one platform to manage, one platform to train users on, all that sort of stuff. So great, you've made the great decision. You've finally picked one, and then you're like, you know what? There's some really good hardware that works really well for our video conferencing solution that will work really nicely with that software. So that now our video conferencing and our meeting experience and maybe even our telephoning experience is all using the same platform. Woohoo! So 95% of your meetings now are on the same platforms. You've gone and you've bought the hardware that supports the video conferencing. But then you go to host a meeting with someone outside your organization and you find that, they don't use the same platform. They don't use Teams. They don't use Zoom. They use some obscure platform. Now you've got a problem around your video conference system.
Call that Google Meet, by the way.
Google Meet, yes.
Go-to meetings.
Go-to meeting, Blue Jeans, whatever it is. You go to host that meeting and your video conference is essentially a brick. It's depending on how you've set it up. So There are quite a few solutions to this problem, and we've found that they have varying levels of success. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on this, Nikki and Yoni. What are the different solutions we're seeing in the market for this this challenge?
Sure, a few different options. First one is probably people just setting up multiple rooms with different meeting room software.
Yeah, that happens. Other than like we do that for demo purposes.
It's something you can do, right?
It is something you can do. So if you've got a suite of meeting rooms, you might say like 80% we're going to set up with Microsoft Teams, but let's have a couple of rooms we're going to set up with Zoom because the CEO only likes to use that, or we have a lot of customers that use that particular system. And it is an option. It can be expensive depending on how you approach it, but most of all, it's just a lot of management. So if you've got a meeting and you know it's going to be Zoom, you got to sit there and go, oh, hang on, which room do I want to book? That's Zoom. And you accidentally book a Teams room and you get there and then you realize it's the wrong meeting room. And yeah, that could cause all kinds of frustration and organizational issues.
Or if you set up like a combo room, someone have to physically go and unplug the hardware, you know, and plug it into the other device.
And that itself can cause issues if it's not.
Yeah.
If you've got a user that's not familiar with the cabling on that, they might unplug it and plug it back into the wrong port or something, and then.
Well, and then definitely they won't plug it back in when they're done. So the next person walks in and is like.
Yeah, like the solution to these rooms is you want to walk in, sit down and push a button and be ready to go, because you don't identify any issues with the room until you go to have a meeting. That's, you know, usually when it comes up. So you don't want to get there and the person before you is not plugged back in. So it's a solution, but it's not a great one, and possible headaches.
The other consideration too is that it's more for your IT team to have to manage, right? So you've you know, multiple applications, multiple pieces of hardware potentially that you're having to manage.
Yeah, room accounts, each account you need to set up. Yeah, it's just the organization and management of it.
I mean, taking a step back from that solution, I think probably the simplest thing that we see people do is just use their laptops. And then they do that and they compromise the experience, right? Because now you've got a, you know, $20,000 room system sitting next door that's useless, and then somebody's like, you know, using their 720 camera on their, looking up their nose from their XPS whatever.
Which is even worse when you've got a group of people sitting around a laptop.
Oh yeah, and then the microphone can't deal with the multiple voices,
the volumes, and yeah, not a great experience.
It's a bad time. It's a real bad time.
Yeah.
And what are the other solutions that you could use that don't involve setting up multiple room systems?
Yeah, so
you
using
crawl
the same
under
hardware.
the desk and you rip the USB cable out of the bottom of your camera and your room system and you plug it into your laptop, then refer back to problem number one.
Problem A, yeah, all your histories, all the calls to your IT department. Yeah. If solutions in terms of using the same video conferencing hardware, so there are third-party interop companies that are basically like a third party that manages the systems talking together. So BlueJeans, Pexip, for example, some of those options. Microsoft. So the issue faced with some of those systems is the features are reduced, so you're not getting the full functionality. You know, some of the things that we love about using the Logitech room systems, for example, you're going to lose some of those cool functions.
And it's not only just the core functions of the hardware, right? It's the core functions of the software too.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
right.
like,
so using Teams room systems, for example.
Yeah. We were talking about, you know, Teams new features in Teams room systems, and like things like Spotlight Video and all that sort of stuff. You're going to lose, you know, when you're using these interop systems, you're going to lose that core functionality, and you're very limited to what that third-party provider can integrate with.
Their capability, yeah, which is going to be different with each of them. But I mean, like, people are paying good money for good systems, and if you're not getting the full functions for the money that you're paying for it, then it just seems a little bit pointless. yeah, you're also back to that point of managing multiple software accounts as well. You know, if you need somebody who can manage that third-party application, as well as setting up an account for it, IT support for it, all those things. So that issue doesn't go away with this solution either. And there's additional costs because it's another application, another program.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of downstream impacts for both of those options you mentioned. And then there's also...
And then user functionality as well. Like some users aren't going to know how to use it. They want to walk in and just know it's going to be an easy solution.
And that's why you choose a platform that aligns with your, you know, the collaboration suite that your users are using every day, so that whether they are in a meeting on their laptop at home or come in and use it, you know, the experience is as similar as possible, right?
Yeah. If you can use Zoom on your laptop, or if you can push a button on a screen, you can use these systems.
Yeah. And the last one that Yoni sort of and yourself touched on was, you know, creating a BYOD meeting solution. So having multiple cables and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So you've got multiple cables. Every device might be different as well in terms of what cables you need. So, you know, each laptop, you know, has different ports. Each sort of part of your VC equipment is going to have different cables. They might not be compatible. There's cables running everywhere. It's a nightmare if you are a big fan of cable management as well. You need to make sure that, that you're coming in with that device and it's going to be compatible.
Yeah. And, you know, I think trying to cater for all those different solutions simply with, you know, having all the different cable options is probably not the nicest solution. So, and so the kind of prompt of this discussion was that, you know, it's no secret we're a huge fan of the Logitech room systems, you know, particularly because we're obviously big Teams users, but there's also some really good solutions for some of the other providers like Zoom and Meet and Google Meetups as well. Meet.
Just meet.
Yeah.
Meet.
I keep wanting to add an up in there. But yeah, so we're big fans.
That's a Logitech product.
Yeah. Plug hardware here.
Yes. And so, yeah, we make no secret that we're big fans of Logitech, and they have invented a new solution that's a bit different to all of these. And we think probably, I've had a quick look at it, and it seems to be a much simpler, more user-friendly solution. So, Nikki, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Swytch, or is it the Swytch?
It's a Swytch with a Y.
Yeah.
I'm still deciding which one I want to go with, if it's a Swytch or a Swytch with a Y. I've been pitched both by Logitech. Working on it.
Swytch with a Y.
Yeah. So the background, as far as I know, is so it's basically a Swytch spelt with a Y. The cable is in the shape of a Y, the adapter on it, and I think that's where it comes from. So marketing team spent days, I'm sure, in a boardroom coming up with that name. So yeah, the Swytch is basically a single cable solution to all the problems that we've already spoke about. So the pitch is single cable solution that you can join any meeting on any platform in any room. Note that the room obviously must have the video conferencing equipment in them. But the idea is walk in, plug and play.
Right. And so how does it work in practice?
Plug and play. So once it's all set up, you walk in, there's a cable sitting available. It's bright purple, so you can't miss it, sitting on the table. Comes with a USB-C or a USB-A adapter, so you can just plug in, and then essentially your laptop connects to the video conferencing system.
Yeah.
You've now got control over the microphone, the speakers, the camera, the displays, and then your laptop basically runs that meeting. So if you've got the Zoom on your laptop, it's good to go.
Yeah. And so, you know, what are the key you mentioned the USB-A and USB-C. Are there any other kind of key technical specifications worth mentioning on this one?
Not really. I mean, you just need to have USB-C. I think it's cool that it's got USB-C. One of the functions it actually does do is while you're plugged in with USB-C is it charges your laptop as well. which is pretty cool. So you can just have that meeting running, not worrying about plugging into power, bringing those extra cables. So that's pretty cool. And also there's a few devices out there like Mac devices, which it means there's more compatibility with as well. But yeah, other than that, just having your video conferencing software.
Yeah.
Hey, Nikki. So I have intentionally stayed away from this, looking at this product, because I've been looking forward to you coming on the podcast for some weeks now. And I was hoping for you to run me through it. I literally have just opened the Logitech Swytch web page for the first time ever. I'm looking at this thing now for the first time. I've intentionally not touched it.
How was my purple Y-shaped adapter description?
Pretty accurate. And, you know, can I just say, as someone who has both a personal name and a business name that constantly gets either mispronounced or misspelt, is like, what are you doing, Logitech?
Like I said, I'm blaming the marketing team.
Yeah.
Not ours, Logitech's marketing.
I'm with you on that. Should I watch this video? I don't know what's going to happen to the sound if I do. Okay. Join a meeting from every room.
You've deployed the perfect video conferencing room solution. With calendar integration and touch control, internal meetings start with a tap.
Okay.
Sounds like a video game voice. The marketing voice. Yeah.
Now people are asking how to use these rooms.
This is probably pretty boring for everybody else.
Especially those who've already watched it.
Yeah.
So like the key thing that I took out of it is that, you know, in terms of supporting something like this, the simplicity is that the only real software requirement to consider to make this thing work is making sure that you have display link drivers on your hardware. So
in terms of hardware compatibility for your laptop,
And so you literally have you have your investment in, for us, it's the, you know, Logitech Meetup Rally speaker combo. And we need to use Zoom. We connect the switch. I think there's some nice cable management wrapped up in there.
Yeah, it's like a retractable kind of, so it coils up under the table, so it's nice and neat and just sits in a little adapter on the table. And slightly retractable, so you can pull it out, plug it in. It's pretty tidy.
So this is, Nikki, this is sold separately to the room system. So you
correct, as an add-on. Yep, optional extra you can add on.
But so you must have, can you use it just with a Meetup or a Rally, or do you need a tap system with it?
It goes with the system. So it's actually got hubs that sit behind it. So it is pitched as a one cable solution from a user perspective, but there is a hub in the background that connects to the meeting computer. That works all the magic and makes everything talk to each other.
Swytch extender, Swytch hub.
Yeah, exactly. I think, the cable, the extender, and the hub. So it all plays together in the background with the existing room system bundles that you would get.
But it's the room system bundle, not just a Meetup.
Correct.
So you have to have the room system bundle, and then it's an add-on for that.
It's an add-on, yeah.
Cool. All right.
So it's perfect for the people that have already gone through and bought the room system bundles with the tap and all those components that, you know, we've had a few customers already raise it, that they've come across this issue a couple of times. So they can go and purchase it as a standalone item after the fact. You don't have to purchase it with the bundle.
With the system. That's cool.
Correct.
That would be a bit of a kick in the guts.
Yeah.
There's a really nice diagram which we'll post in the description, a link to it, where they show you how it all works. There's a few components. And
it's like an X-ray cable diagram. Yeah.
That will explain it a bit easier, but ultimately, right, it's the capacity to for a low IT management, really easy end user experience, connect your really fancy video conferencing system to your laptop and still get a really good experience out of it without essentially breaking the standard room experience. So it's not, you don't have to ever plug something out that needs to be plugged back in. It's either using the the Logitech Swytch by itself, right?
Yep.
And if you unplug it, it goes back to the standard configuration.
Which is like one of the biggest points is
Mm.
you're not going to lose or have any confusion. Once you unplug it, it just returns to its original state.
Yeah.
You don't have to reset the device or anything like that. Push any buttons. It's literally plug in. I'm on the Swytch now. Unplug. I'm back to my original room system.
And so when you're on the Swytch, it's basically giving you the camera and the microphone and the speakers and everything along with your display being put up on the screen. So you're using the desktop version of whatever video conferencing system you're using.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which obviously will mean that the person has to have their laptop there to operate the meeting. You won't have access to the tap.
Correct. The tap is basically the only thing that you don't have function of because you're running the meeting off your laptop.
That makes sense.
Device. Yeah.
There's a couple of really cool things in this. First of all, USB-A and USB-C, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Display link, a bit of a finicky driver. However, I'm pretty sure they're only using it for the USB-A port because you need display link in order to get video output over HDMI over USB-A, whereas USB-C has it built in natively, so maybe they're not using it for that. I'd certainly recommend using the USB-C option if you've got it. But the other cool thing, USB-C with power delivery. So I wonder how much power. 60 watts. How about that? That's cool.
Yeah, so there's the part, I think it's called the extender, the part that goes under the table is where the power supply is.
Right. Yes, got it. Okay. And that's got all the many powers. 60 watts will charge basically anything. Yeah, and that's pretty nice. And the last thing I really like is that they've got that extender running via presumably Cat 6 extension like the Rally Hub does, which is really important. Like almost every, Nikki, almost every meeting room we go to set up has an existing Cat 6 run to the table.
Or in like a floor channel or something, yeah.
Yeah, and the floor channels are hit and miss as to whether you can get into them and whether they go to the right place. And so having that ability to extend using existing Cat 6 cable back around is super handy.
Yeah, agree.
Cool. And is it available in Australia yet?
Not yet. It's coming very, very soon. So the latest I've heard is it's expecting to come into Australia in the next few weeks.
Cool.
No confirmation on a date or anything yet. That's just the expected date. But yeah, you should definitely see something pretty soon for that.
Great.
Stock levels?
I think that's the holdup.
That's the holdup.
That's the holdup with releases, just trying to get stock available and into the country.
Do we know how much it costs yet, Nick?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
I'm trying to get to the bottom of that. I'm not sure of the range where it sits just yet.
Cool
so
stuff. I feel like it's going to be super popular.
Yeah, it's still definitely going to be cheaper than some of the other options we ran through. But I just don't know.
You don't have to keep paying afterwards every month.
Yeah.
It's a one-off. Yeah, exactly. There's no subscription. There's no management of it. It's all in as part of the room system.
And it feels to me fairly future-proof, right? Like the challenge is, right, like that, you're using the desktop application, so you're not beholden to a software developer to continuously integrate and bring those things across. It's less likely to break because there's less people involved in the process. You're maintaining the ease of use of your existing system. Like, it just seems like a really good thing, and I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this once we can actually get our hands on it in Australia. So I think the message is we'll keep you posted, and as soon as it becomes available, I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest on this one. And if you're experiencing these things, I'd say don't go, and you've got a Logitech device, don't go out and look at multiple rooms or the interop guys or something like that. Hold off if you can, because there's a very simple, easy to deploy solution that's built for your existing meeting room system.
I think if you predominantly use one system, that's right, Haydos.
Yeah.
If you're a consultant who's constantly required to join other people's meetings on whatever platform they're using, then maybe an interop solution makes more sense to you. if you don't have one dominant system.
Yeah, okay.
Because like I really appreciate the meeting room experience. I walk into the room, I don't have to have my laptop with me. I sit down, it comes up on the screen, it's in the calendar, I click join, finished, right? Whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's a good experience. And if you're constantly switching between them and you're using the Swytch more than the native room system that you've bought, then I feel like that might be a bit of a slightly second class solution.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's no good answer.
Yeah. I think you got to look at your own requirements.
Yeah.
For us, it makes sense. We've got teams split, probably fairly equally across Melbourne and Sydney, and we're constantly using it. So it makes sense. But as you say, if you've got, if you're doing most of your meetings with people external, then it might not be quite right. But worth considering.
The devil will be in the details, like with this one, I think, like a lot of things. That's a lot of bandwidth to run HD audio, HD video into this thing.
Yeah.
Or into your laptop from the Swytch, and then output 4K video back out through the system. Also keep in mind, it's now got to go through the computer, in the meeting room computer, and then out to your monitor. There's lots of moving parts in that. I'll be very interested to see from a technical point of view how well it holds up.
Yeah.
So maybe
definitely
we need to
interested in getting a demo for us to have a look at and
get
a better idea of the experience.
We'll want to put it through its paces. That DisplayLink logo is the thing giving me shivers at the moment. Well, yeah.
We'll have to. We'll keep you in touch. We'll keep in touch with on how that goes, and maybe we can come back and do a full review in a couple of weeks, and
maybe Nikki can join the podcast from the Swytch.
Teams.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. Final thoughts? I think we've covered it.
Yeah, I think that was the final thought. I agree. It's case by case. But yeah, definitely if you've got a dominant meeting room platform that you like to use, it's just that one person or that one customer that might come up. It's definitely worth considering.
My next guest is an absolute glutton for punishment, and he just keeps finding excuses to come on the podcast. Welcome back to the F team, Bilal.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on time yet again. Wink, wink.
Well, the 3 ain't bad.
No, we appreciate you making the time. Very good. So the reason why I wanted to get you on, Bilal, is that late last month, the internet experienced one of the greatest disruptions in recent memory. So on the 30th of August, CenteryLink, which is an American ISP and internet bandwidth provider, literally broke the internet and brought down some of the biggest technology companies in the world, including Amazon, Cloudflare, Twitter, Xbox Live, Stream. There's literally hundreds of organizations were affected by this, right? So how does, what happened? How does one organization have such a big impact on so many organizations across the world?
Well, first of all, CenteryLink is a tier 1 provider, so it is one of the major players in the US market. Especially the way that the internet is set up, like everything is interconnected. So suppose you have an internet connection and you have multiple upstream providers. CenteryLink might be one of them. But your smaller providers that you're buying internet off, they might actually be backhauling their traffic via CenteryLink in the back end. So from this end, you might be thinking, okay, so we have redundancy, but they might be going down the same path at the other end. And even if we've had ISPs, obviously, with issues, but none as bad as this in recent memory, just because how unique the situation was in this case. This wasn't something just going offline. This was went offline and make sure everything else also went offline.
So what was the underlying problem that really stuffed up CenteryLink here?
But the interesting thing is it's probably just one person just putting in an incorrect command somewhere. So basically, the root cause of the situation was an incorrect configuration for BGP flow spec. Now, a lot of people will be wondering, like, what is BGP flow spec? So BGP is like one of the core dynamic routing protocols. The public internet essentially relies on it. Flow spec is essentially an addition to that protocol. This is basically designed to basically act as a counteract DDoS attacks. So let's just go back a little while. So before flow spec, we used to have this thing called remote black holes. So if you're getting a DDoS attack from somewhere else, like the most you could do is either black hole all the traffic coming from a specific source, or black hole all traffic going to a specific destination. These are very like heavy-handed approaches. So there's like, it's either 0 or 100. Either traffic is coming in or it's just going into this black hole and never coming out. Flow spec is a dynamic, basically, you could think of this like ACL or firewall rules for the BGP session. And it looks into far more detail, so into the data flows. So it looks at source, destination, what protocol, what port, what are the traffic bandwidths, the net flow. And depending upon that, it can see what the offending service is and block that, and then pass it on to the network, like block this. Now, pretty great solution. It solves a major issue. But in this case, someone made a mistake at CenteryLink and set up an incorrect rule. We don't know what the rule is, but because it affected other providers, we know what the effect was. So basically, it told their devices to shut down, essentially, like drop all traffic incoming and outgoing. But still, the sessions were up. And it was a very vicious loop. So basically, this device would send rules to the other ones, like block all traffic. Once your traffic all would block, those devices would go down. The BGP rule, because it's dynamic, it will go out of their cache. Those devices would come back up. They'd learn that rule again, go down again, come back up, infinite loop. So it wasn't like you could try and fix one, but it was like you couldn't jump onto a device because they were just going up and down, up and down, up and down. And for other providers as well, because this, like, if I'm connecting to CenteryLink, so if it's something down, I know I can move it to another provider, but it's just like constantly flapping, coming up and down, which cause the issues. There's another thing as well, probably going into a bit too much detail, but with the way the internet works, to have incoming traffic, you advertise your IP prefixes to the internet, like, hey, I'm here, send traffic down to this particular vendor, right? The issue with them was they were still advertising the prefixes out, but they couldn't pass the traffic on. So say, for example, Cloudflare, one of the larger organizations which was affected. Now, most people use Cloudflare for their DNS, 1.1.1.1. That's like the standard. Like, I use it. I tell anyone else, like, use open source DNS, don't go for the other ones. So their prefixes are still being advertised by CenteryLink. So traffic would go into CenteryLink and then into a black hole. Like, it's not going anywhere. So if your path to the Cloudflare took that CenteryLink, you couldn't get to Cloudflare. If it was taking another provider, you might have been.
That's crazy.
I can go into a bit more detail, but yeah. It just meshes out so much more.
Yeah, that's hectic. So like I've done a little bit of research, but for me, you know, the marketing guy, my network knowledge is fairly limited. But what really struck me was the scope of this thing, right? So I read a Cloudflare blog that said that by their measurements, there was a drop in global internet traffic. So all internet users, if I'm reading this correctly, there was a 3.5% drop in global internet traffic just from this one incident, which would make this, obviously, as I mentioned at the start, one of the biggest internet outages ever. So do you have any information about who else was affected? Like, and you know, when someone was affected by this outage,
Yep.
Like, what's the effect on them?
So
In plain terms.
So we can basically classify them into two different areas. So category A, where you're using CenturyLink as your provider, either for transit or something else. And category B, you actually are not related to CenturyLink at all. But the service that you're trying to get to, they use CenturyLink for their transit. So if you're in category A, you have a device, you use them for internet, well, you're out of luck. It's down, it's coming up and down. There's like very differences. You try to move to a different provider, but because the way this incident happened, because generally speaking, when you do failovers, it's like if a session to a provider goes down, you move to another one. This one was coming up and down, up and down, up and down. So your automatic failover mechanisms would be just going crazy. So you had to do a lot. In this case, a lot of the time you had to manually do it. The thing was, this was early morning Sunday. Networking teams are quite bare bones on early hours of Sunday morning. So there was that. The other one is like, say you and I. So we're not directly affected by CenturyLink because we don't use their services directly. But you and I do use services who have CenturyLink as a provider or who connect to CenturyLink. It can be Cloudflare in this case, Microsoft, like Amazon, even Ride Gaming. I actually found about this outage from a colleague of mine, Bart. I think he's been on the podcast before. So he told me like, first he messaged me, Cloudflare is down. I can't get to Cloudflare. I was like, okay, they might be having some issues. Then he said, major issue. I can't see League of Legends games. It's like the major tournament is happening for the World Qualifiers and their servers are down.
And that's when the alarm bells really go off.
Exactly. Like that's when
League of Legends.
Yeah.
Game over.
That's when it goes a code red. You're like, yeah, like they had to run their matches on other servers with other players and like had to do like weird sort of workarounds. But that's category B. So we're using a provider who is using CenturyLink for their transit or other services. And in that case, even though you're not directly affected, but you can't get to that particular service.
So is it likely? Is it likely that they would have had to do some kind of manual, like providers who are in that category B? Is it likely that they have to do some kind of manual intervention to bypass them, or is it?
In category B, you can't really do much because it's out of your hands. In category A, you can fail over to someone else. You can do something else, but in B, you're connecting to a third party. That third party has to deal with whoever the offending party is in this case, right? And you can't do anything about it. You just wait. Either if a particular service can be redirected somewhere else, possibly, but in general, most cases, that's not on you. Your third party vendor is directing the traffic, or like using dynamic DNS to take you to somewhere else, and you're dependent on them.
That's crazy. And so, so we've talked about how you might like do a workaround if you're category A, but how was the actual issue resolved? Was it something that CenturyLink did? Is it something that, other providers did? How did that all play out in terms of resolving this issue?
It's interesting. So generally speaking, obviously, if a provider is having issues, it's up to the provider. But because the way the issue actually spread, they started losing connectivity to their own devices. So in a very unprecedented move, which I've never really seen happen, they started contacting other providers who they peer with and told them to shut down their sessions to CenturyLink. Like, we can't do much. Like, we are struggling to get onto our own devices. You just stop connecting to us for a short period, and then we'll rebuild all the services. And like, I've never heard of that before. Like, you can possibly one provider, if you're having an issue, you might go to that particular one, but go to all your peers and say, stop talking to us. Like, we're in the middle of a shit show, really. Like, just do whatever. Just don't send traffic this way while we try and sort this out.
That's mental. I did read on quite a few of the articles talking about this around how much of a big deal that was for a tier one provider to just say, leave us alone, please.
Yeah. Another thing as well, like you said, like it affected like 3.5% of the bandwidth essentially traffic goes down. But like I said, category B, those sort of things can't really measure. So they were impacted in this as well. So this goes above that 3.54% of traffic. Like that's just the traffic which was directly affected, right? But what are the people who were indirectly affected, who were customers of customers, who people who were using that? So the impact certainly becomes a lot larger than on paper.
It's crazy. So what does this incident like tell us about the nature of the internet or the nature of networks? Like what can we learn about the internet from this issue?
Well, the internet works the way it is because it's so interconnected, right? But in cases like this, it can also come back and sort of bite you. But that's something which you need to consider as well. Obviously, this is like such an extreme example, but it still raises a point that you want to have like proper diverse upstream providers to make sure, okay, like if you're going for like providers, make sure that the other one isn't really reselling you the same thing. So on and so forth. Like the old code, like to paraphrase, like no man is an island. You can say like no enterprise is an island. Like we're all part of the internet whole. So in cases like this, when something else happens, even if you're not using CenteryLink, or you're not using the provider in this case, that ISP, just because of the interconnected way that everything's set up, you can still be affected and things just might be out of your hands. You can try and do as much to prevent these issues from happening. Obviously, some cases you can't, but it always helps to have like the most diverse and solution that you have, and have your DR solutions ready as well. So in case something does go down, what next? Like business continuity.
Yes, exactly. Well, look, that was really interesting, but I don't know if I've been as interested in networking as I have after listening to you and learning more about this issue. It's for me, it really paints a pretty, there's a fragility to the internet that if you don't understand the inner workings and then how to make it work for you, introduces a lot of risk to the business, and particularly if there's, when you're dealing with upstream providers that you might not even know about, and you can't, necessarily contact, that's a real risk. So I think having that knowledge about where your internet traffic is actually going, how it's being used, who are your suppliers, who are their upstream suppliers, really paints a picture of how important that is.
It does. And we look at it slightly different to most companies as well, because we're looking at it as from an enterprise perspective, from a management perspective, but we're also an ISP, right? So most cases an enterprise doesn't really care what's happening upstream. It's the ISP's case in that case. So the seed of like connecting to the global internet, they just have a single uplink to their ISP, and then their ISP is connecting to the wider internet. So that's why like we're interested in both aspects of it. The counterpoint is like the internet has spread so much because it's so easy to like connect into it and set it up, right? But sometimes it can be like a double-edged sword in this case, where obviously even an issue which is outside of your spectrum can affect you in drastic ways.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the F-Team. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. The video is also available on our website, ftpl.com.au. If you have any questions about anything you heard today, please reach out to us via the website. See you next time.